Hi, it's April 28th, 2009. Today we're interviewing Alexei Romanoff for the Silver Lake Oral History Collective. I'm Michael Matserson, and I'll be conducting the interview, and our cameraman today is Bob Herzog. So, Alexei, we'd like to just start with, can you give us your full name and
My full name, my name, the three names I use is Alexei Boris Romanoff.
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 Okay.
Yeah,
so
that's my full name.
Okay, and where do you currently live?
Right now I live in Pasadena.
Okay. And have you lived did you live in Silver Lake?
I lived in Silver Lake for quite a number of years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right. How long did you live in Silver Lake?
Approximately 11 years.
Okay.
12 years.
What years were those?
Well, I arrived in California in 1958.
Okay.
And the raid on the Black Cat was in '67.
Okay.
And I had just moved at that period of time.
Okay. And where were you prior to California?
New York City.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born in Ukraine.
Oh, okay. Very good.
And my mother was in show business.
Uh-huh.
She was a dancer, headliner. She was in George White's Scandals, Sickfield Follies.
What was her name?
Her name was Pauline Tucker, but her name was Julie, oh geez, I forgot now. It was, I hadn't used the name in so long.
This was her maiden name?
It was a maiden name,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So anyway, she was pretty famous, interesting woman. I was born in Ukraine. We're Ukrainian extraction.
Mm-hmm.
And she was there visiting with her grandmother, and I was delivered at that time.
Oh, so it was an accidental that you were at the time?
My mother was born in the United States, but
Uh-huh.
her parents were from the Ukraine.
I see. Okay.
So, yeah.
And she met your father here in the States?
No, she met my father in the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm telling my age, it was just prior to the World War II.
Okay. Okay. And your father, how did they meet? Where did they meet in Ukraine? Was he in the entertainment industry too? Or?
Yeah, somewhat like that, I
Mhm.
believe it was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
you were born there, and how long did you stay in the Ukraine before your mother?
I arrived in the United States when I was 9 years old.
Okay.
And we had traveled eastward, and we stayed with some relatives in Manchuria for 2 years.
What years were those? Talking about
well,
the 30s or 40s?
Yeah. Well, I was born in 1936.
That's okay. We all have an age. So, okay. So your childhood was a very interesting time.
Yeah.
In the world, there was a lot
Yeah.
happening, and you were kind of a part. There was
Yes.
a large movement, I know, of Russians
Yeah.
and Ukrainians to
Yeah.
the Far East.
To the Far East, the war was starting.
Mm-hmm.
The Second World War was starting, and people were moving eastward to get away from the Nazi onslaught.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, were you with your mother and your father at this time?
No, I was with my mother at that time.
Okay.
My father was in the military.
Okay, so he was back in
Yeah.
Russia.
But we moved forward. My mother is Eurasian,
Mm.
and my grandmother was from Manchuria, but
Oh.
raised in the Ukraine.
Okay.
So we went to stay with relatives in Manchuria.
Mm-hmm.
And from there we went to neutral Portuguese countries, immigrated into different, because they were neutral, we
Uh-huh.
were able to travel.
Okay. Were you went to like Goa or something like that?
Well, it was one of the Chinese provinces was
Mhm.
owned by Portugal at the
I
time,
see.
Macau.
Oh, Macau, of course.
Yeah, and the Portuguese were neutral, and we were able to travel from Macau to Portugal and then down to Brazil, and from Brazil we managed to get to Canada and back into the United States.
Well, that's quite a route.
Yeah.
And how long did that take to go to?
About 2 years.
2
about
years.
2 years.
And was the ultimate goal to come to the States, though?
Yeah, back to my mother's place of birth and my grandparents who were here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There.
And they were in, where were they?
They were in Pennsylvania at the
Okay.
time.
So that's where you went initially?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, my mother's name was Julie Parker.
Julie Parker. Okay. That was her maiden name.
No, that was her stage name.
Her stage name.
Her
Okay.
stage
Julie
name,
Parker.
yeah.
Very good. And what happened to your father during this time? Did he
My father was killed
in the war?
in the war.
I
Yes,
see.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But your last name was his
Yes,
last name.
yes,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you never had a chance to know him very well then?
As a child only.
Yeah.
Very, very briefly. I knew my mother's family much better than I ever did my father's.
Right. Okay. So your mother, you came to the States with your mother, and then tell me, did she continue to be working as an entertainer?
She was an entertainer,
Mm-hmm.
yes. One of the funny parts of the story, though I don't want to dwell on these parts, one of the funny parts was that some of my babysitters, when my mother was working, were people from Minsky's, like Lily St. Cyr.
Oh, really?
And some of the entertainers. And though I was very young at the time, I used to sit in the boxes to watch them perform.
Oh, really?
And they wore expensive outfits at the time, garters and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So when they would take these, they were gold garters, when they would take these garters off, they would toss them out to the audience, supposedly, but there was always a shield in the audience who would catch the garter. And so they would throw it up to me in the box because they always knew they would get their products back.
And you were just a boy at the
I
time.
was just a kid, but it was a wonderful experience.
So they were checking IDs at the
Yeah.
door then, were
Yeah.
they? So you this was in New York presumably at
Yes,
this time.
yeah,
So and then
yeah.
so you were in your late teens and early 20s.
Yeah.
Were you in New York at that time?
Yes,
or-
I was.
Okay.
I was, and I studied nursing
Oh, okay.
there. I also dabbled in the theater,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a number of little things that I did in my life.
Uh-huh.
I'm retired now, a retired nurse, and yeah.
So you did work as a nurse.
Oh
then?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It gave me the freedom to go on cattle calls, which is tryouts for show business.
Right. Exactly. So what drew you to California then when you were in your early 20s when you moved?
Yes,
here?
I
Yeah.
was in New York. We had a terrible storm, and I was sitting there, and they did a kinescope broadcast from California,
Mm-hmm.
which meant coast to coast, over a direct line instead of being through the air, I guess. And they were showing freeways. They were showing 5-lane highways, and they said you didn't have to pay to travel on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw palm trees and beautiful buildings, and most of all, warm weather, because I was locked into my home at that point. And I called a friend up, and I said, I'm going to move to California. And I had had an incident just prior to that with a lover who had passed away from cancer.
Mm.
And so it was about a year after that. So I decided I needed a change.
Right.
So I was going to come to sunny and beautiful California. And so it was when I did get here.
Good.
And I landed in Silver Lake.
Really? And how did
Yes.
that happen? How did you end up in Silver
Well,
Lake?
I had a friend, Steve, who was a boyhood friend of mine. We both were of Ukrainian extraction in a community.
Mm-hmm.
And he also was gay.
Mhm.
And his father lived in California. And he had been out here. So he knew which areas were gay.
Mm-hmm.
And when I said that I was going to come back out here, I asked him where I should go, and he told me Silver Lake, because that was one of the gayest areas at the time. Equivalent at that time, not as openly, but to Castro later on in our
Okay.
history.
But so even in the 50s, Silver Lake was a
Oh, it
a
was
known gay.
tremendously. What there was in Silver Lake was there were a lot of privately owned homes that had elderly people living there, and they had rental spaces either behind the home or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the gay community tended to rent those places,
Mm-hmm.
little places. And Silver Lake is unique in that.
Mm-hmm.
To have those kind of houses behind houses and
Mm-hmm.
things like
Yeah,
that.
there's a lot of
And the people were older, and they were kind of like adopted families. We would make sure that they got to their doctor's appointments. We would do shopping for them.
Mhm.
We would do things like that. We created a little community
Mhm.
with kind of a family that we didn't have at
Mhm.
the time because we were gay.
So in many cases, your friends have been sort of kicked out by their families.
By
or
their
they're not-
families,
they're
a
not
good number of them.
Mhm.
And later on, I'll go more into that when I talk about the Black Cat
Okay.
and our fears and things like
Okay.
that. You know.
So when you came, no, so you moved to Silver Lake because your friend Steve was here, and did you work
No,
as a?
he wasn't here. He was in New York at the time.
Oh, but he suggested you come.
He suggested because he had lived here already.
Right.
He had visited with his father. I think his father lived in Paramount, and he used to come to Silver Lake to go out
Uh-huh.
at that age.
Bars were.
Yeah.
And did you work? What did you do for work at that? Did you work as a nurse when you came?
Well, I had to wait as to get my credentials from New
mhm.
York and all. And in those days, there wasn't any kind of rapid mail and
Right.
that sort of thing. So you did wait, and I had some experience earlier in my life to working in a jewelry store.
Mhm.
My one of my mother's husbands was a jeweler,
Mhm.
and I went to work for a store called Whitefront at the time as an employee of theirs. And then when I got my credentials and took my things that I had to, I got my job in nursing again.
Mhm.
But I worked there for a period of time. Over on Olympic Boulevard, close to Silver Lake in
Okay.
East Los Angeles.
Okay. So your life was sort of centered on this part of town.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
it was. Though I ventured up into Hollywood because at the time Hollywood was also very gay.
Mhm.
There were a number of gay bars that we socialized in.
In Hollywood.
In Hollywood, they were right on Hollywood Boulevard and on the
Really?
side streets.
What
yeah.
were they? Which bars were they? Do you remember?
Oh, there was the Roman Terrace. There
Mhm.
was, geez, there was so many of them. there, too.
Spotlight.
The Spotlight, of course.
Still there.
There was the Mr. T's,
Uh-huh. I've heard of that.
and they were owned by a small group of people, but
Mhm.
there was a number of bars that were owned by the same groups of people. Same
Mhm.
owners maybe had
Mhm.
2 or 3 gay bars, and usually the owners, unlike New York, who owned the gay bars, were gay here,
Mm-hmm.
and that wasn't true in New York. It was
Hmm.
syndicates that
Oh,
owned
okay.
the
They
gay
kind of
bars
controlled
there.
it, but here it was
Yeah.
like family owned, right? So,
Well, it made it more comfortable.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it made
So
it
you
more
have that,
comfortable.
right.
Yeah.
So in '58 you moved here, and then you were working as a nurse eventually.
Yeah. But
And
I
so-
also
and you were
I worked in the interim there. I also worked at a gay bar in Silver Lake on Hyperion Boulevard
Mhm.
that was called the High Spot.
the high spot.
High spot.
Okay.
And there was a man who helped me there, and we used to call him Mama Tommy. His name was Tommy,
Uh-huh.
and he managed the place. And I did shifts there. I both worked at the Whitefront store, and I worked in the evenings
Mhm.
there. And I was approached by a woman named Leroy to help her open a gay bar on Sunset Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
And the gay bar then became the New Faces. It originally was Patty's Pub, and it was a local neighborhood bar that was really an awful place. If you wanted to really get drunk and you weren't gay, you went to this place.
Uh-huh.
And we had to close it for 60 days in order to get the old clientele to stop coming
in.
and letting them know that it was they were under new management, and it was called the New Faces, and our logo was the theater logo of the smiling
Comedy and
Comedy
tragedy.
and Tragedy.
Okay. Where was it located?
It is now the Circus of Books.
Mhm.
It was on Sunset Boulevard and Sanborn.
Mm-hmm.
There was a drugstore across the street. It is now El Pollo Loco
Oh.
is across from it there, on the same side of the street,
Uh-huh.
but across Sanborn.
Got it.
and about a half a block from the Black Cat,
Okay.
or the bar,
La Bar,
La
Barcito.
Barcito.
Yeah,
right
Barcito.
now,
Yeah.
yes.
So this woman Leroy approached you about
Approached
opening
me
this.
about opening
And how
it.
tell us about her?
She was an interesting woman. She was elderly, I'm sure at this time, deceased, and she was friendly with the gay community, a businesswoman. It was an interesting experience, and we opened the bar, invested in it, and with time and finances, and it turned out to be a very successful endeavor at the time. Like that.
What year was this that it opened?
It had to be 4 or 5 years prior to 1966.
Okay, so 61,
Because
62.
67, 66, 67 was the raid
Okay.
on the two bars
On the 2 bars.
on New Year's Eve.
Right, okay.
Reagan had taken office, I believe, that at midnight as governor of the California.
All right. So New Faces on the corner, the Black Cat was a half a block down,
Yes.
and what was the relationship between the 2 bars? Just they were next to each other?
Just next to each other.
Okay.
There was no real relationship.
Do you know who owned the Black Cat then?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't. That's how little contact.
Okay.
There were a number of bars. There were bars on Santa Monica Boulevard. There was a place over that was called a Detour, and but that wasn't the Detour at the time. That was another bar, and there were so many bars in Hollywood and Silver Lake and on Melrose, and this is Hollywood Boulevard, Santa Monica Boulevard, Melrose, and in Silver Lake, Sunset Boulevard, and Hyperion, and all of those areas. There was even a bar on Silver Lake Boulevard.
Oh, there was?
Yeah, at one time, a little tiny place.
Oh, where on Silver Lake?
Just where the little business district is down there, just
Where the
before
7-Eleven is.
where
F.E.
before the Silver Lake splits.
Okay, sure.
There.
Right in there.
Yeah,
Huh.
right in there was a gay bar.
I'll be darned.
So there,
Do you remember the name of that one?
it was 42 years
Lost in
ago.
the-
Lost in the memory of more recent
Yeah.
things and in the age.
There you go. Well, so let's go. Let's advance it a couple years. So you started the bar, and that was in the early '60s, and then and it thrived. It sounds
Yes,
like.
it was doing well.
So that kind of and so Black Cat was obviously drawing patrons too.
Yes.
So then
Yeah.
now, in the mid '60s, prior to the incident we're going to talk about, was there a sense of openness in terms of being gay, or was
No.
it very closeted?
No.
You had to really
This
keep it.
is-
I mean, you say that there were so many bars everywhere.
This is why we went into bars. No bars had open windows to the outside, as they might today. Gay bars. They were very secretive. If someone walked in that you didn't know, everybody got really quiet. The clue word was that if someone you didn't recognize came in, don't do anything. And when I say do anything, don't talk to them, don't do this and that.
Right.
Because there was an element of entrapment at the time. And even in the high spot, my friend Steve moved out here a couple of years after I did. And we lived together in Silver Lake on Fountain Avenue. And then he got a partner. His partner moved, and he moved in with his partner. And they were in the high spot. And I don't know if you want certain type of language, but anyway, in this, they were arrested in the high spot. What had happened is that Steve was standing over Sal, who was his lover, and they had beers in their hand. And Steve leaned and spilled some beer on Sal's shirt. Steve went over and was brushing the beer off, and they both were arrested for lewd conduct.
Just for that?
Just for that. There were undercover officers in the bar, and they were arrested for lewd conduct.
So any physical contact was subject to...
And I went as moral support for them when they went to court. And they admitted that they were gay. And if they were going to be doing anything, they would have done it at home. And the officer completely lied and said that they propositioned him to go home with them. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to go into the lurid details that the officer implied.
Right. Because
those things weren't done in those days.
And what was the outcome? What happened to them?
They were convicted.
Were they sent to jail? Or
No. They were. I believe they ended up having to plead to a lesser charge, which meant that they wouldn't have to register as a sex offender.
Okay.
That was the big thing. That was the thing that was held over everybody's head. That when you went into court, they would offer you a lesser charge with a fine, and you wouldn't have to serve any jail time, but you wouldn't have to register, most of all, as a sex offender, which will follow you the rest of your life.
All right. Wow.
So that's one of the incidents of entrapment.
So this was going on with some regularity then, it sounds like, that they were
Very
undercover
much so.
officers coming into bars and doing that, and so...
Yeah.
Okay.
And there were numerous bars. There was the Ram's Head Inn, which happened later, but close to that time. There was a little cave. They just redid it. It was an empty building down near Silver Lake Boulevard and Sunset. It was right on Sunset. I just noticed it had been boarded up for years, and it just recently opened as some different business there. But there was a Ram's Head Inn, and there was a little cave. It was a half a block down from it. There was when I moved to California, there was a restaurant and a gay bar right on off of Michael Terena, or Mitchell Terena, I forget. And it said both ways. And there was a gay bar there, and there was an all-night restaurant called Anna's. And that was a gay hangout after hours, and that when you got out of the bars and the bars closed, because that was mainly our social outlet, were the bars. I can't impress that as much as I would like to. That it wasn't that we were lushes or that we wanted to get in there and absolutely get drunk, though some people did. It was the fact that that's how we met people. There was no internet. There was no openly dating services or anything like that. There was a thing called a key club where professionals went, and it was a private club, and they would get to meet other people there because they didn't dare go into the bars because they would lose their board certification, their licenses, or whatever it was, physicians, lawyers, things like that.
So that's how they connected with
That's
other.
how they connected.
But this must have been, I mean, if there was this much undercover activity, even when you went into a bar, that must have been sort of permeated with that fear. I mean, if you met somebody, did that inhibit you from talking to them?
Oh yes,
I mean,
at first you had to get to know them, or if they came in with somebody that you already knew, that was the difference. That was what we would kind of look for. There was another place in Topanga Canyon that was called a Canyon Club. It was a little resort. There was a pool there. It was like a country club, but for gay men and women. And they had a huge dance floor. They served food. And we would go there on a Saturday night or on a Friday night. And they had 2 jukeboxes. There were no DJs at any of the bars or clubs at that time. we would go there, we would have dinner. There were 2 jukeboxes, one at each end of the dance floor. When one was playing, men and men could dance together because it was illegal at the time for men to dance with each other.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't dance together. Women could dance together out in public, but
Mhm.
men could not.
Mm-hmm.
Like men would get arrested for cross-dressing, but a woman could put a pair of slacks on and a plaid shirt and go out and not have any problems with that. But if a man put a woman's dress on,
Right.
he was arrested.
Right.
You know, even in the gay bars. Now, not all gay bars had cross-dressers,
Sure.
but they were there.
Uh-huh. But at this club in Topanga, then you could.
It was what would happen with the 2 jukeboxes. Men and men could dance, and women could dance there. Gay men,
Mhm.
gay women
Mhm.
at the time. There wasn't the definition in those days of lesbian and gay man. They called themselves gay women then.
Right.
That wasn't until a little more of the liberation movements the changes happened. So when one jukebox was playing, you could dance all you wanted. But when that jukebox went off and the other one went on, everybody switched partners. The men took up with the women and started to dance. That meant the sheriff's department had come in to inspect the place.
All day.
So we would all
amazing.
switch. And I could remember a time of taking a friend who was a woman and going in when the one jukebox was on. And it was a membership. You actually bought a membership to this club. And I brought a guest in with me, and she was a newly coming out lesbian or gay woman.
Mm-hmm.
And we went in and we just started dancing. And in the middle, the one of the dance, the one jukebox went off and the other one went back on, and everybody switched partners again. And she just stood there and she couldn't believe this. It was like, what is all of this? Because she had never seen men dance with men.
Wow. So it just blew her mind.
Blew her mind with that. But that was
That's
one of the
amazing.
incidents. And getting back to Silver Lake,
What was the name of the club in Topanga?
the Canyon Club.
The Canyon Club. Okay.
Canyon
The
Club
Canyon
it
Club.
was,
Okay,
yeah.
very good.
And that was around from the 50s clear into the 60s, and then for some reason I think there was a fire or something, and then it had closed.
Mm-hmm.
But it was one of the historical and a
Okay,
huge
I've never even heard of
place.
that,
A
actually.
huge
So,
place.
That's great to know.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Dave, let's go back to Silver Lake then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back in Silver Lake, so there were so many places that we moved from place to place. We didn't just go to one bar and stay there for the whole evening. We would go and kind of like tour around and see different friends and things like that. But we always were on guard. We never were basically openly gay. There wasn't outside meeting places. There were dangers. There was a place called Akron's that was in Silver Lake. It is now Circuit City, across from PBS, Channel 28, in that little shopping center. And Akron's had things from all over the world, like Cost Plus or something like that today. And the gay men used to go in there and do a lot of their shopping to decorate their homes, you know, and to do things like that. Well, we knew if you saw someone come in there with a suit jacket on, they were a police officer, undercover officer, in a store like Cost Plus to check out the restroom to make sure the gay men were not doing anything there. And if they had a suit jacket on, because detectives at that time usually wore jackets. You know,
Fairly obvious then.
yeah, like the TV shows that you see. They always had bad jackets on at the time. But that was a little bit. And we lived in our communities. These were our communities. These were places that meant something to us. I lived in a number of places prior to moving out of Silver Lake. I lived on Griffith Park Boulevard twice.
Mm-hmm.
I lived on Red Cliff Street off of Mitchell Terrena.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I lived in on Fountain Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
My friend Steve went on to live for years on Fountain Avenue. I still pass by his house quite often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he was one of the people that was taken by the plague
Wow,
that
dear.
we had.
I see.
So, and we had been friends since I was 9 years
Oh,
old,
wow.
like that, and continue to be friends. We had thoughts that when we got older, and possibly not as attractive as we were at the time, that we would end up living together and taking care of each other,
Mm-hmm.
like that. But you can never make plans like that
Yeah.
because things happen. And never did we think there would be HIV in
Right.
our community.
Right.
And one of the points is that we're missing a whole community that relayed the information from the prior community to the younger one. There's a whole community in there that's missing, that was the tide, the continuation of the chain
Mm-hmm.
to bring us together and to tell them, this is your history. So this sort of thing is really important,
Absolutely.
so that the younger generations will know where we come from and what we did to achieve where we are. I hope in the future it will be better for us.
Right.
That's my one look. If I look back when I was 14 years old, and I want this to be on this film, there was a man in Bryant Park, New York, off of 42nd Street and 6th Avenue, who was called Mother Bryan. He was 84 years old at the time. I was 14. And he told me what it was like to be a gay man in 1890 in his 20s
Wow.
at that time. And he was the inspiration for me to want to do things in the gay community, because he told us kids who were sitting around him, we used to go down to the automat and sit there with a cup of coffee and listen to him tell us about our history. And someone has to pass that on, because our history hadn't been written about, because we were so undercover.
Mm-hmm. An oral tradition. is,
Oral tradition. And he was 84 and I was 14. at the
What did he
time.
tell you that had such an impact
It was
on
being beaten by the police.
you? Mhm.
There were foot patrolmen at the time, and if they knew you were gay, they would wait outside of your house so you couldn't leave and go out in the evening, because they knew you were going to be doing something terrible,
Mhm.
and they would beat them.
Mm.
And they would meet in small little groups in apartments. There weren't gay bars.
Mhm.
There weren't places like that at the time.
Mhm.
They would make friends, and one friend would recommend another one and introduce them to somebody else. And it was so closeted at the time. And if they did know you were gay, you were persecuted. You had to leave your home and go somewhere else where they wouldn't know that you were gay.
Mhm.
And that's some of the things he told us. And he told us that in your lifetime, if you don't leave your community, whatever community you belong to, he believed this, if you don't leave your community a better place than when you found it, you haven't done anything in your life. No matter how you've worked and what you've done and what you've earned, that means nothing if your community isn't in a better place. If you don't do something. And when we appeared by the board downtown Los Angeles, and I testified to them, they asked me why I wanted the Black Cat designated as a historical landmark. And I said to them, so that in 50 years from now, when I am no longer here, some very young gay person can turn around and say, where did my freedom start? Where did I get my human rights? Where did I get my civil rights that our Constitution guarantees us? And there is an actual place like Bunker Hill, Gettysburg, or Selma, Alabama. There's an actual place that he will be able to go to and look at and say, this is in our history, this is the place where some of the freedom started, because anywhere from 300 to 600 men stood up and came out and demonstrated on February 11th of 1967 because of a raid in 2 bars. The largest demonstration that ever had been held in the United States to that date.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I think that brings us to New Year's Eve.
Yes.
To the
Yes.
Black Cat. So can you tell us about this?
I can tell you what I had heard about it, though I was involved in getting people together and the demonstration. I was not there that evening.
Okay.
But what had been reported to me by numerous sources to this. The Black Cat was decorated for Christmas and New Year's. People had come there to celebrate New Year's Eve. A number of men had kissed that evening, a New Year's Eve kiss at midnight. All of a sudden, there were police officers everywhere in plain clothes arresting the people who were kissing. It wasn't that you weren't allowed to kiss. They kissed for, I think it was 40 seconds longer than would be permitted. So they were arresting all the people that had been kissing in there. 2 of the people in the bar ran out and ran down to the New Faces for sanctuary to get away from that. The police followed them down to the New Faces, burst in, asked who the owner was. Someone pointed at Leroy, who was the woman owner of the place. They heard the name Leroy, not as 2 words, but as 1 word, Leroy. They thought it was a man. They thought it was a cross-dresser. They grabbed her. They beat her up at the time. They broke her collarbone. They dragged the bartender across the bar. They put everybody on the sidewalk face down who was in the bar. And I believe at the time, but I wouldn't swear to this, they took pictures of the individuals, which was common when they would raid a bar. They would lead everybody out of the bar, and even the people they didn't arrest, they would take pictures of them to have a file at the time. That happened. The abuse happened. The people were arrested. There were organizations that came to help defend them later on. The defense was not successful. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court refused to hear it. A number of those people had to sign up as sex offenders for the rest of their lives. A number of them had ended up in the hospital because of the beatings. It was claimed that there was resistance. There was no resistance in any one of the bars. Gay people didn't resist in those days there. We ended up meeting, a group of us, through telephone tree, a telephone tree type thing. We called each other about what had happened. Organizations started to get together. They were small organizations, they weren't large. So it ended up being a group that got together. We met at a bar that I believe it was called the Hub Bar on Santa Monica Boulevard up by West Hollywood. There was the Hub, there was a Circus, and there was the Stampede, which was a very large bar just east of Fairfax on Santa Monica Boulevard. So we met at the one bar because the owner would allow us to meet there. Well, and a whole group of people got together. We talked about it. We try to encourage people, one person calling 4 or 5 other people. We try to encourage people to come out and demonstrate. It took us from New Year's Eve to February 11th to convince people, enough people, to come out and demonstrate against police brutality at that time. At that point, it was no longer just entrapment. There was brutality. The reason people were also scared, approximately 3 or 4 months earlier on the Sunset Strip, there was a group of anti-war demonstrators who were beat up there and were sent to the hospital by the police at the time. West Hollywood was not a city then. So it was either the sheriff's department or the police, but they beat them up. That was the fear we had. That was absolutely the fear we had. There were 3 things that we were afraid of. First, being beat up by the police. Second, being outed in the news media and our pictures taken and showing we would lose our jobs, we would lose our income, we would lose our homes. And most of all, if our families didn't know, we would be alienated from our family. That's what took us so long. And it was a lot of courage for that group of people, 300 to 600 people, to demonstrate 2.5 years prior to Stonewall in New York.
Alexei, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Where was the media during all of this? At that time, there were 2 daily newspapers in Los Angeles.
None of them showed up to cover the demonstration.
Would you say they were in collusion with the police?
Yes. Yes. Yes, I would. At that time, they were. I believe the only people that covered it were the free press at the time. Now, we had to watch that we didn't step off the sidewalk. We were passing out leaflets. We had signs. I have a picture over here, not an actual picture, but from the Barcito, La Barcito function that we had on February 11th of this year, which was 42 years to the day of that demonstration. I have pictures from that with people holding signs saying about police brutality, blue fascism, stop blue fascism, and things like that. And people talking about what was going on at the time. The media did not cover it at all. They weren't interested in covering our things that were happening to us. We were perverts. We deserved everything we got at the time.
Where was the demonstration held?
Right in front of the bar.
Of the Black
That was
Cat?
the Black Cat, and in the parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
We were there. We were up and down the block. At that time I said there was a pharmacy on the corner. We were up and down the block. We didn't go across to where the New Faces was. And both bars shortly after that, because of police harassment, were closed. They were closed. It wasn't that we came out and all of this happened and the police just stopped doing that.
So the harassment continued.
Continued in Los Angeles.
The day of the demonstration, though, did they attempt to arrest anybody? Or they photograph anybody? Or
No,
so
we
they did
watched
let you...
what we were doing. We didn't want to give them an excuse to charge in and say we were disorderly or we were in violation of laws and things like that. This was, I wouldn't say well planned, but people knew their limits of what they could do. And there were no federal agencies that we could go to and say that our civil rights were being violated at the time. We weren't a protected class.
Far from it.
Far from it.
So-
In fact, we didn't become what the courts consider a suspicious class until this past year, when they okayed marriage that has been since overturned by Proposition 8.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I was demonstrating over here in Pasadena off of the 210 on Lake Avenue prior to Proposition 8,
Mm-hmm.
the vote on that. And I had one very nice black man said to me, "Why should I vote against Proposition 8? And I said to him, "Because I was in the marches for your civil rights."
Mm.
And I was. So, and last year I was in the march for trans, their pride march that they had down Santa Monica Boulevard.
Mhm.
And I marched at that. And I've been in every one of the gay pride parades since the first one, since we stepped off the sidewalk, almost unscripted in there.
Wow.
I was in every one of the parades to this day
What year was
in
the
Los
first parade?
Angeles. In the early 70s.
Early 70s.
Early 70s. It's a little blurry to me, so
Sure.
many of them.
So, right.
It's like people say, "Do you remember this?" And did you do this or did you do that at the time? And a lot of times I've done, not that I've done, but we have done so much over the years that it comes together.
Files on it.
Yeah. And, I'm not finished. And as I said at the Black Cat, the night of the award and everything,
Mhm.
I was very touched that the very people who are our enemies now were standing there in the bar and are not our enemies, who are gay men who are in the police department now.
Right.
And that the city council, Garcetti, thought enough of the incident
Mhm.
to come and to give the awards to the people who were there at the time and to see what was happening. You
Quite a
know,
transformation.
what a transformation. And never did I think. My partner and I were married August 8th of 2008, 8/8/8 of 2008, we were married.
You're lucky.
And, but we had already been together for 11 years, 10 years, you know? And here we were first allowed to marry. I think the shame was the women who had gotten married in San Francisco. They were in their 80s. I think the one was 84 and the other one was 86 or something like that. And they were married in San Francisco, and then that was overturned, saying the courts put a stay on it and annulled the marriages. And the one died before 2000, before this year, when we could get married in 2008. She passed away. Was never able to redo that with her partner. And they had been together for 60-something years. I mean, that's the injustice of it. And this history is important to tell the kids that no one has ever given us anything that we haven't had to fight for. And what we don't use, we lose, even though we've gained it. We have to do that.
Well, I think this is particularly important, what you're talking about, because the incident at the Black Cat and the New Faces has, I think, oftentimes been sort of lost in gay history.
Yes.
Because Stonewall, a couple of years later, has always sort of pointed out as sort of this turning point, you know,
Yes.
in gay rights.
Yes.
But, you know, I believe that what you did on February 11th of 1967 was a huge turning point in
Yeah.
gay rights. Why do you think why do you think it's not been treated with the same level of...
Stonewall got press
Stonewall.
coverage.
Yeah.
Got
that's
press
true,
coverage. It bordered on a riot, if not a riot. We were peacefully demonstrating our civil rights.
Mhm.
So it wasn't a walk out in the street, in your face, I'm gonna fight you type thing.
Right.
It was saying, we're mad as hell and we're not gonna take this anymore. That's what we were saying at the time. And these were a wide spectrum of our community. A wide spectrum of our community. You know, They were groups and people who had nothing in common with each other except that they were gay individuals, men and women.
Well, you demonstrated incredible bravery at the time to do what you did.
We were scared.
Not knowing what would happen.
Yeah, we were scared. I'm not going to say
Mm-hmm.
we did it anyway, but we were scared.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I admire Morris Kite and Harry Hay and some of the forerunners of the things that we had done, the Manishan Society, and the people who demonstrated in front of the White House, only 5 or 6 of them, and things like that.
And the Matserson Society was formed in California, I believe,
Yes.
here in
Yes.
Silver Lake.
Yes, yes, it was.
You used
And it used to come in they had a little magazine or a newsletter that became The Advocate, by the way. And the organization that we started, that meeting that came out and demonstrated, we had a newsletter, Pride. That's where the word came from. I have it written out there what it actually means. But it's the first letters of a whole sentence that make up the word pride, and that was the name of the organization.
The original gay pride.
Yeah.
when did the term gay become universal, popular?
It was
About when?
it was in the early 30s. It was a lingo that we would use, a language that we would use. There was a whole way that if we were out in public in a little group, we would be able to speak to each other using terms that were common to language, but not used for what they were at the time.
Friends of Dorothy?
Friends of Dorothy, he's gay, and that didn't mean that he was happy. It meant that he was a homosexual according to, society. He was straight at the time meant he wasn't gay. Though the connotation I don't approve of today because it somehow makes being gay, if you're not straight, there's a crookedness there that isn't there. But it's the same. But it was the language we used. There was another term that's no longer used that was called kai-kai. That means he was bisexual.
Kai-kai.
Kai-kai. He swung either way. And of course there was the proverbial box and basket. And those of you who are gay will know what this means, and I won't go into it. But anyway, those were terms and language that we used out in public, that if there was another table sitting close to us, that they wouldn't know what we were talking about. And to identify somebody who was walking in, that what we call our gaydar, would go off, we would say, isn't he gay? Or isn't she gay? And that would mean that they were homosexual in our own terms. These people wouldn't know what we were talking about, therefore we wouldn't get beat.
Right.
Or into a fight or anything like that.
So you had to be in the know.
Yes.
To really,
yeah, you had to be in. I can remember the people who mentored me as I came out at a very young age. I was, like I said, I was on 42nd Street hanging out with a group near Bryant Park and wandering around. And we were all 13, 14-year-olds. You know, people say this is a choice. Being gay is not a choice. I wouldn't have chosen to be discriminated against and have such, not a hard life, because my life was halfway decent, but to have people reject me because they found out that I was in love with a man or I was with a man at the time. I wouldn't have chosen a lifestyle for myself or for anyone else like that. And they say if only you would just stay in the closet and you were quiet. And there were people who were gay at the time in Silver Lake who kept saying to us, if you don't make waves after this, if you just keep quiet, this will all turn over and it will go away and it will get better. It never did until we did something. It never did. You know, the thought that you just have to stay in the closet. And there's a lot out there who don't mind us being gay. They don't want us to be out. They don't want us to talk about it. They don't want it. But you know, it's a lie. I can remember with a lover in New York City, the first time. Apartments were very hard after the Second World War to get in New York. And if you were looking for an apartment, you went to the landlord. There were no leases at the time that you signed and stuff like that. You just went and looked for an apartment. And two men could not, and I repeat that, could not live together without being a relative at the time.
Really?
So we would go into trying to get an apartment. We were half brothers, that's why we had different last names. Different fathers, the same mothers. We thought all of this out. We were cousins, different names, same family. All of this sort of stuff we would come up with in order. And one day where I'm going, I had a lover at the time who was a partner, and we were going to move in together, and we're looking for an apartment. And this landlord showed us the apartment, and he said, "So what's the relationship between you two?" That was a common question. If two men, two women, nothing. Two men, what's the relationship between you two? And I finally remembered Mother Bryan. This was after the fact. And I looked at the landlord and I said, "This is my partner and my lover." And he was quiet for a moment. And I looked over at my lover's face at the time, and it was white and this look of horror that you had admitted that we were homosexuals. This absolute look of horror. And I looked back at the landlord. We waited a second. He said, "Can you afford this apartment?" And I thought to myself, this is his out. He's going to say, "You guys can't afford this apartment." And we said, "Yeah, we're both working." And he says, "Okay, the place is yours," and he handed me the keys. And I looked and I said, "Thank you, Mother Bryan. I will never lie about who I am again." And that was my coming out. That was my outward expression. Though I had never been very secretive in my social life, in my everyday life, I was. That was my coming out.
How old were you then?
If I was 17 or 18, it was a lot.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
I never lied about it again, or was embarrassed to say, "I'm a homosexual" or "I'm a gay man." Because some people didn't understand what gay meant. My own mother didn't understand the terminology when I came out to her when I was very young. I had a relationship, it was one of my first, and I had...
Michael.
Yeah. 2 minutes.
Okay. I had a relationship. I had come out to my mother, and I said to her, "You notice that I've been kind of sad the last week or two?" And she said, "Not particularly." "Well, I'm failing." I said to her, "Well, I'm gay." And she looked at me, and she was doing something around the house. Now, she had been in show business. And she says, "Oh?" And she walked away. And I said, "She don't understand." I ran up to her and I said, "I'm not happy. I'm telling you I'm a homosexual." She said, "I knew." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She said, "That wasn't my place. That was your place." She says, "Remember a lot of the parties we went to? They were gay parties in the village."
Alexei, what a wonderful life and what a wonderful story. We're so appreciative of you taking the time to tell us all this.
I'm glad I
It means
could
so
do
much to
this.
us. It really
And
does.
I hope someone in the future who is a young gay man gets to see this and understands what it was like in my life and a little bit about what it was like in the life of Mother Bryan in the 1890s.
Wonderful. Thank you.